Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, the Fortune Society and FJC have partnered up to build better futures in housing development opportunities. The CEO of FJC and the Deputy Chief Executive Officer for the Fortune Society shares more later on. How did the partnership between FJC and the Fortune Society begin? Then, glue traps are trays coated with an extremely sticky adhesive which is often used to get rid of rodents. The New York State Director for the Humane Society of the United States tells us about the dangers of using these traps. How are these traps also dangerous to other wildlife and household pets? After that, Vox released its June highlight issue, a deep dive into pervasive and enduring discrimination. The deputy editor of Future Perfect for Vox tells us about her article on pervasive discrimination against Black people. What was the inspiration behind this research? And finally, Kitten Therapy is a delightful and heartwarming gathering designed to provide relaxation, joy, and emotional support to participants. The president of Puppy Kitty New York City joins me to share more details of their event. What are the therapeutic benefits of kitten therapy? So stay tuned. All this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello everyone, I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today is Tuesday, July 4th. The BronxNet team would like to wish you all a happy 4th of July. You are now watching Open, a live program bringing the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. Homelessness remains a significant issue for many individuals leaving prison. To address this challenge, the Fortune Society partnered with FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds, to offer affordable housing to formerly incarcerated people. The Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Fortune Society, Stanley Richards, and the CEO of FJC, Sam Marks, joins me to discuss this effort. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Now, Sam, how did the partnership between FJC and the Fortune Society begin?
So my relationship with Fortune Society goes back maybe 15 years. Prior to being at FJC, I worked at a corporate foundation, I worked for a nonprofit lender, and now at FJC, we're a foundation of donor-advised funds where we manage philanthropic accounts for a range of stakeholders. And in all that time, I've collaborated with the Fortune Society, I've watched them from afar at times, and I've always known them to be a best-in-class organization, incredibly creative set of folks. So when at FJC, we came up with a sort of creative, innovative idea of how to use philanthropic dollars, we were really thrilled that the Fortune Society said, yeah, we'll work with you to test it out.
Now, Stanley, a lot of the work the Fortune Society does centers incarcerated or formerly incarcerated individuals. What are some challenges they face when they are released from prison?
Well, one major challenge that Fortune took on years ago, as Sam was talking about, is housing. What we've seen is that people come home, they're not able to access housing resources in the community. Many have served long time and no longer have family. About 25% of the people who walk through Fortune's door right now come in as homeless. And one of the things we know is that people don't have a safe place to live, if people don't have access to mental health care, substance abuse treatment, employment and economic opportunities, their chances of staying in the community diminish significantly. And so as an organization in 2002, we took on providing housing to people impacted by the criminal legal system, and opened the Castle. Shortly after, we opened up Castle Garden, which is supportive and affordable housing. And that's where our work with Sam begun. And we're really excited about the opportunity we have right now.
Now, I'm also interested to know, I think housing, we just spoke about this recently, is a huge issue, especially in New York City. How is that heightened for people who are affected by the criminal justice system?
Well, when you look at the criminal justice system, the majority of the people in the criminal justice system, particularly in New York, are Black and brown. And what we've seen is that many landlords use criminal convictions as a proxy to discriminate and exclude people of color from housing. And so we have been fighting this issue from a policy standpoint. We have been advocating for policy that we are calling fair chance for housing, where landlords can't look at a criminal conviction at the beginning. They need to vet the person for tenant worthiness before they start doing the conviction, to reduce the barriers for accessing housing for people with criminal convictions. The other side of that, we've been providing supportive and affordable housing, which means people can afford the units and receive the kind of supports they need to rebuild their lives in the community. And report after report demonstrates that supportive housing for people with justice histories is a benefit to the community, is a benefit to the individual, and it's a benefit to society overall. It's about an investment. And we spend a lot of money incarcerating people in New York City, $500,000 to incarcerate one individual. Imagine what we can do with that money if we invested that money in housing.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that fact, because I had no idea that was the number like per person, and it's just wild to even hear it. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this show.
Now, Sam, what is FJC's role in ensuring these individuals have access to housing that they can afford?
So the real work in this partnership is being done by Stanley and his team at the Fortune Society, providing services and providing housing. Where FJC comes in is helping the Fortune Society with a particular bottleneck that they face in the housing development process. So the Fortune Society, Stanley and his team are experts at assembling all of the complex financing that you need to build this supportive housing. It involves city, state, federal resources, bank financing. There's a lot of complexity, and it takes a lot of time to get these projects off the ground. So while a supportive housing development might cost tens of millions of dollars to build, it's in those early stages, the pre-development stages, when they have to assemble the financing, do feasibility studies, do a ton of community work. There's a lot of work that happens in those early phases. So they might need a couple of $100,000 to get a project started so they can get to the closing table where the tens of millions of dollars come in. And that's the piece that FJC is taking on, the timing of the costs associated with pre-development support.
Now, how is this different, or what are some aspects that make this unique compared to typical philanthropic support?
So when most people think about philanthropy, they think of grant support, giving money away. And nonprofits need that critical support to fuel their missions. There are particular activities of certain nonprofits, like building supportive housing for the Fortune Society, where a more appropriate type of resource that's needed is a loan, specifically a low-interest loan. So the donors at FJC that are participating in this fund have agreed to allow Fortune Society to use their funds for 5 years, revolving those dollars multiple times for multiple projects. And that allows our donors to not just give their money away once, but make it available to the Fortune Society so that they can recycle the same dollars over and over.
Now, Stanley, what is the Just Home initiative, and how will it support this effort?
Well, Just Home is an innovative model that will target people who are formerly incarcerated with high medical needs that don't require hospice care, don't require hospitalization, but requires an intensive medical connection. It is on the Jacoby Medical Campus. It is going to be about 70 units. It's going to be mixed use. All of our projects are mixed use, so we provide some units for justice impacted people and some units for the community. And it's a way of beginning to help people rebuild their lives. Right now, we have people who are in hospitals and who are incarcerated only because they have no other place to go. They have no other residence to live in. And so Just Home will provide permanent supportive housing for that population.
Now, you mentioned it's going to help people rebuild their lives. Can you just talk about why that is like such an important aspect to think about? Because when we have conversations about people who are formerly incarcerated, just being out isn't enough for people to get their lives back. So can you just talk about the importance of recognizing that?
Absolutely. I mean, what we're talking about is generational change, right? As an example, I'm formerly incarcerated. I was born and raised in the Bronx and still live in the Bronx. And I cycled in and out of prison all my life. And it wasn't until I went to prison and went to school, went to college, that I realized that that didn't have to be my life. And what we're talking about is providing people opportunities that I had. I came home, I married a wonderful woman, now been married 32 years, going on 33 years, have 4 kids, all grown, all moved out, not involved in the criminal justice system. So the kind of resources and support I received allowed me to reconnect, give back to my community, raise my family, and break a cycle of incarceration that I went through, my baby sister went through, my baby brother went through, and stop that generational cycle of incarceration. And that's what Fortune does every single day when we serve the men and women who walk through our doors, when we provide supportive housing and education and employment. It's about generational change.
And then can you also just talk about why it was important for your organization to be a part of this?
I mean, you heard what Stanley just said. It's an incredibly inspiring story. An organization like FJC that has donor-advised fund accounts, we work with New Yorkers mostly, people from all over the country, who have more money than they need, and they set up a philanthropic account so that those resources can grow, they can increase their philanthropic capacity, and then deploy those dollars to the causes they care about. And many of the donors who came into this fund didn't know about Fortune Society, didn't know much about the supportive housing industry. And so when we have donors in our network, we can inspire them with the stories of Stanley and the program participants and tenants in Fortune Society housing. We were able to bring them on site visits to see the housing and meet some of the folks who were affected. So that's the exciting opportunity here, is helping our donors think about how their philanthropic dollars can be put to use for maximum impact.
And here's the human-centered part of it, right? Is that we all want to figure out a way, how do we make society better? How do we contribute to the capacity of others in our community? And the partnership between FJC and Fortune is about bringing those partnerships together. The uniqueness and capacity of Fortune is embedded in our diversity. 50% of our staff are people with lived experience, 30% of our exec team, 30% of our board. But it's the diversity of our organization and partnerships that really bring about a way that we could see each other differently, and about a way we can have an impact that's greater than our individual impacts.
Now, what would you say to a nonprofit organization that's looking to make a difference and needs that extra help? How would you guide them through it?
I would say this is a model that nonprofits who are in the housing sector, they should take a look at. This is also a model for someone who has resources that's looking at, how do I leverage my resources to make a difference? This is an opportunity for people to lean in a way that is aligned with your values about how you see people and the kind of impact you want to have. And this is a model to do that. So I would encourage donors, people with resources who are thinking about, how do I impact nonprofit organizations, to look at this model. It's an innovative model that allows the recycling of an investment to bring about transformative opportunities for people who are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system.
And then could you quickly just let us know what would be the best thing for nonprofits to do if they are interested?
Yes. I mean, there were a number of things that made the Fortune Society a good fit to be the first out of the gate. One was that they had large capital projects where they needed a little bit of funds up front with a high likelihood of recovery. The other is the Fortune Society had a level of scale and sophistication and a long history of borrowing and repaying, so they were a good credit. And finally, the Fortune Society brought some of their own resources to the table. So of our $600,000 fund, half of the dollars are coming from the Fortune Society and their own stakeholders, and half of it are coming from FJC donors under our umbrella. Yes. So it was this ability to find engagement across these very different types of communities to put this money to work.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us and having this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Kibin.
Don't go away. We'll be back with more Open right after this.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
We all know what it's like to feel alone. But it just takes one new connection. Want to get out of here? To empower many.
This is unbelievable.
It doesn't take a superhero to bring forces together. We all have the power to reach out
Let's go!
and help someone feel like they belong.
Pretty cool, huh?
We are stronger together.
Most hiring algorithms would scream me out.
Some bosses couldn't see me as a leader.
I've run this place for 20 years, but I still need to prove that I'm more than what you see on paper. I've been running code as long as I've been able to reach a keyboard.
This is what I do. It's second nature for me, coordinating 100 details at once.
The way my mind works, I have a very mechanical brain.
I sold them on my skills.
You gotta be so good they can't ignore you.
My magic is
analytics and empathy. That's how I'm getting clients. You have to have the confidence in yourself to show up and defy the odds.
I'm more than who I am on paper.
I never got a college degree. And today, I'm the CEO of my own company. People want to tell me I'm one in a million, when actually I'm one of millions. The stars are all around us. It's time for them to shine.
Welcome back. One of the most common forms of pest control are glue boards, also known as glue traps. They're small trays with a highly sticky adhesive used to catch rodents, but many animal activists say these traps are cruel and could even be dangerous to other wildlife. Brian Shapiro, the New York State Director for the Humane Society of the United States, joins me to discuss these traps and some new alternatives. Some viewers may find the following images disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me here today. It's great.
Now, as I mentioned, glue traps may seem like a safer option compared to what many have seen before, like snap traps. Yeah. But can you just talk about how both of these forms of pest control methods are harmful and cruel to rodents?
As many things with society, you know, the things that are easy, convenient, pervasive, that there's always other effects. So these glue traps, as you described them, which are these boards with a very sticky adhesive surface to them, you can get them almost anywhere in New York City. What we've seen is that the way that it impacts rodents, it is arguably the most cruel form of pest management that there is. Again, just speaking plainly, because it is a graphic topic, the animal will become stuck, suffocate, dehydrate, may break its own limbs or chew its own limbs off. So it's not a matter of, it is in no way a humane form of managing pests. When you look at all of the ways that people use, and you know, rodents have been with us as people throughout history. When you look at the ways that we are using to manage and address sort of an infestation or a conflict that we have with these animals, there really is no humane way to address it, but there are ways that are more inhumane than others. And the glue traps are the most egregious of these, and that's why we're focusing on it.
And I'm really glad that we're focusing on this, because I think that almost especially if you live in New York City, you probably just thought like, oh yeah, like we have mice in our home, we have to get rid of them. But it never really, at least for myself, it never occurred to me like, yeah, like once the mouse is on the trap, what happens after that? Like, I understand that they're not dead, when they're on the trap, so they are like enduring a lot of suffering. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
The suffering that the animals go through, it's really quite unimaginable. In addition to, as I mentioned, sort of the animal twisting to try to escape from, if one can just imagine what it would be like to be trapped for an extended period of time until you die. The adhesive material can get into the eyes, the nasal passages, cause suffocation. So again, it is the most inhumane type of management that there is. So people need to consider that as consumers. Again, back to the choices that we have. This is something that I would hope people will take a wider look at and think, to your point, geez, what happens to that animal? What is the end result of my buying this convenient item, putting it down? And is it really going to solve the problem? Because we'll talk in a little bit about holistically, there are many more ready to come in.
Right. Now, in addition to harming mice, can you talk about how glue traps can also be a danger to other wildlife and small animals?
Absolutely. Just previously, the president of Puppy Kitty New York City had shared with me a video of a cat that had a glue trap stuck to it. We have received at the Humane Society of the United States snakes, bats, small animals, even children, have these things stuck to them. As I said before, when we try to find the most convenient, easy, cheapest solution, there's always another side to that. And these are items that stay in the environment and can affect other wildlife, just like rodenticides. It stays in the environment, and then another animal could eat that animal, the mouse that has been poisoned, and it goes on and doesn't fully solve the problem.
Now, I wanted to talk about this because on my way home one day, I saw there was a small bird on a glue trap outside, and I've never seen anything like that before, so I was just so shocked to see that, and actually Googled it when I went home, and it's a very common issue that happens. What should somebody do if they see that? Is there a way to free these animals, and how can you do so without harming yourself or the animal?
It's funny, just as we're talking, they're like little landmines that are just left around and indiscriminately just, tagging itself onto various wildlife. It's been known that one way to free an animal from a glue trap, ideally one would be able to find a wildlife rehabilitator, but we live in the real world where one may not be available.
Or in the city.
Or a veterinarian. A cooking oil, like a vegetable oil, an olive oil. If someone is to do this, wear gloves, be very careful. It can be applied to the animal, oil up the animal, and then the animal can slowly be released from that. And again, in an ideal situation, that's very stressful for the animal and can affect their ability to stay warm if there's a way for the animal to recover. So again, in an ideal world, or if someone finds wildlife stuck in them, that's one of the ways that I understand people have been able to address this.
And would you encourage somebody to attempt this? Let's say they do care. My brother was telling me oh, you might actually hurt the animal more than save it, if you don't know what you're doing. Would you encourage somebody to try that? What would be your advice?
I think it's all based on what we are comfortable with. It's something that I have friends who have been able to do that. Again, in New York City, we run into these things, we see these things. So I would say based on your comfort level, but always be careful. Always remember, this is a wild animal. You don't want to get bit. But we do what we can to alleviate suffering, the suffering that we see in our lives.
Now, I do have some good news. West Hollywood was the first city in the United States to ban glue traps. Can you just talk about, maybe what were some things that probably led to that?
You bring up a good point, and you could never point to why something happens politically for one reason, as they say the stars align for different reasons. Quickly, I'll give you an example. In New York State was the first state to prohibit the convenient surgery of declawing cats. I've been with the Humane Society for 11 years now, and that I'm still amazed at how things came together. Depends on the advocates in the community, the knowledge that they have, knowing your council members or your legislators, and then getting it through the process. So I think just the stars were right for that to happen. No pun intended for West Hollywood. The stars were right for that to come about. And I do know in New York City, the most effective animal protection organization based in the city, that's Voters for Animal Rights, VFAR, they are considering legislation to introduce to the city council to address the sale of these animals, and hopefully they will have the same fortune.
Now, I want to talk about how glue boards, if anyone's like wondering, like, what do you do next? Or like, what are some things that we can do? Could you first just talk about how they aren't really an effective way to control rodent population, especially here in New York City where this is a problem?
It's interesting. It's not just the advocacy community or the Humane Society of the United States saying this. The Center for Disease Control strongly recommends against the use of glue traps because the animal can defecate, urinate, there's blood involved. So this is something that is recognized by the Center for Disease Control not to use. Until we find a way, again to use the term holistic, to address such things as, when we put our trash out at night in the city or in municipalities, we're basically putting out a 24/7 buffet. And these animals have been a part of our culture and society just, again, throughout history. Until we find a way, as some European countries and municipalities have done, to seal that in, to have containers. My niece, when she was young, it would be just like breakfast times, an explosion of Fruit Loops everywhere. Even in our homes, we have to be able to realize, like, it's not easy to fully clean up or to seal where the animals might come in. I mean, a rodent can come in through something the size of a quarter. And that's something that my father has a house upstate. We tried to figure that out, put in like a steel mesh to try to seal these places up. So it is not something that's easy, but the alternative, I would recommend you take the time to try to do the best that you can, and the city should be doing the same thing too.
Now, if you do have a rodent in your home, what is the best way, or something that is not as cool, to make sure that it's not in your house?
Like I said earlier, all houses, all homes are different. I've lived in the city, I've lived upstate before. There are traps that you can do to re-release the animal, which might not be ideal for New York City. As I said at the beginning of our discussion, there is no fully humane way to do this, but we have to make choices on what are the most egregious and cruel ways, and that would be one of them. Bridging back to making sure that our food is sealed, contained, doing the best we can to have either a clean home, seal things up. And I understand that the city now has a rat czar. I know that the mayor's been looking at this, and various administrations have as well. What can we do to try to keep the streets clean, have the Department of Sanitation find different solutions based perhaps on European models? So this is something that's not going to be solved overnight, but as consumers, we can have choices and make a difference.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that. I wanted to ask, how do we make sure that this is something that's accessible to everybody, like looking for these holes or looking for these entry spots so that the mice can't get in? How do we make sure that everybody has access to that type of work?
Well, the fact that we're here today and talking about that, public education is very important. I hate to refer to Google, but you can always try to find out. There's a lot of information there. You can we have some information available at humanesociety.org and to look up glue traps. So there are ways to take a common sense approach. If you see where the mice, usually you can tell where they are coming from. Maybe it's behind a baseboard or so. If you have a responsive landlord that might be able to help with that, or someone handy around the house. I'm not very handy, so I would find someone, try to seal things up. educate yourself, because at the end of the day, just throwing that glue trap, that little landmine down, it's not going to solve the problem, because the source of the food is still there and they will keep coming back.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you so much for joining us, especially, after what I've seen. I'm happy that other people are talking about it, and this was already on people's radar. So thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation.
It was a great opportunity. Thank you for having me.
To keep up with the Humane Society and the work that they do, please go to their website at www.humanesociety.org. Stay tuned. We have more open for you right after this.
Where did the time go? Somehow I lost all those years. Where did the time go? I don't know how I got here. Oh, how did I get here?
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Welcome back. In a recent article written by Izzie Ramirez and Sean Collins, Vox Future Perfect examined the issue of racial bias as part of a broader discussion on racism. The article highlights the pervasive discrimination Black people face in America throughout different aspects of their lives. Izzie Ramirez, Deputy Editor of Vox Future Perfect, joins me now to discuss the article. Izzie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Now, what was the inspiration behind exploring anti-Black racism and discrimination in the way it looks for Black people in America?
Right. So Vox had this awesome collaboration with an all-Black newsroom, capital B, and we really were looking at, a lot of follow-up from what has happened with George Floyd. All of these discussions have been mounting for so long, and we really wanted to look at all the different facets of discrimination, whether it's health discrimination, monetary discrimination, all of these sorts of different ways that discrimination can impact your life. And that was kind of like the impetus behind it. But for our piece specifically, we'd been in touch with researchers at the University of Chicago, and they had accrued like this insane body of work, about 50 years of studies, around 40 plus studies that looked at all of the different ways that discrimination is really pervasive for Black communities. And we, dug through and wrote the piece.
Now, I'm really glad you mentioned that there was so much study that goes behind it, because in the article you talked about how it's a challenge to call out discrimination and how it's sometimes hard to prove. Can you expand on that idea and how finding this research helped, with writing this article?
Yeah, so the big thing that we really wanted to focus on is, discrimination is hard to prove in the sense that you never really know what's in someone else's brain when it happens to you. Let's say, you're up for a promotion and you didn't get it. It's kind of hard to say, oh, it's discrimination, right? Mm-hmm. Unless it's obviously very blatant, aggressively in your face, which,
right.
Not very fun. And, Black and brown folks, this is something that we know deeply, intrinsically, but there's the benefit of having the evidence, since there's oddly this debate about whether or not it is discrimination, which I find really fascinating, mm-hmm. where most academics are no, this is we have all of these studies, it's proven time and time again, whether it's through correspondence studies or different types of study work. But that was kind of the big thing about the piece, was just discrimination can be hidden. And a lot of the folks that I spoke to for it were just sharing their stories with me. I talked to maybe 16 folks. Not everyone made it into the piece, but they were just I will never know, and it like is driving me up the wall that I will never know.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I really want to touch on the fact that you mentioned George Floyd earlier. I was very surprised that even after George Floyd, there were people that were still maybe in denial about the presence of discrimination. It seemed like after that moment happened in our history, like we were moving forward, or like people were starting to understand. Can you just talk about that moment when you realized like there are people who still don't believe that this is really happening?
Yeah, so a lot of it can be in certain like either academic circles, policy circles, where like there is a lot of, what they like to call confounding factors. Like, oh, like, can we really say it's anti-Black discrimination? What if it's income? What if it's geography? What if it's XYZ? And all of these studies, like, they were conducted in, like, all sorts of parts of America, right? Like, there was one study that even used, like, cell phone pings for, like, to look at voting, and like how long it would take for folks to vote depending on where you live, if it was like an all Black community, et cetera. And like they found that no, like if you're living in a predominantly Black area, like you will be waiting longer to vote. And the piece was really about time, right? Like that was kind of the thing that we really wanted to focus on, because like a lot of folks will like mention like income or all these other facets, and time is really hidden. It's insidious, like the time that you lose because of like a 15-minute weight loss, or someone wasting your time in other arenas, like at a restaurant. That's less time with your family. That's less time, for work. That's less time doing the things that you care about, and that like adds up, considering that like Black folks have a less life expectancy than white folks.
Right. And I like that you mentioned that. I thought it was a very interesting way to address this, because we've seen so many articles talking about racism and discrimination, but I've never seen it kind of highlighted in this way in regard to time. Now, we've done segments exploring racism and discrimination in healthcare, home buying. Can you talk about how this plays out in much smaller everyday situations, such as like getting an Uber, or like you mentioned, just waiting in line? Can you expand on that a little bit more?
That was like the thing that we really, like Sean and I really wanted to hone in on, because like you've probably seen those like viral studies where it's like, okay, like if you were going to get your house appraised for like a mortgage, and you were to like swap out the photos in your house from like a Black family to a white family, same exact house, just different pictures, your house would get appraised more, right? And like, so we'd seen these pieces and we're like, okay, what can we add to the conversation that hasn't really been addressed that much before? And so we really wanted to focus in on smaller acts of discrimination. That's not to say that like the impact isn't negative or as harmful, but just like these little moments where like, as you said, like the Uber voting lines, there were some studies around like whether or not someone will help you cross the street, which that's a blink, like 7 blinks, right? Like not a lot of time, but like over the course of your life, those little things are cumulative, and that's kind of what we wanted to address in the piece, like things that like you might brush aside. One of the sources that we spoke to was just like there's a defense mechanism, like you can't spend all of your energy worrying about it, because you'll drive yourself up the wall. But at the same time, like you are losing like time in your life.
Right. I love that you mentioned that, because sometimes I'll go to the doctor and I'm like, this is taking way too long. Like, I'm like, I'm just here to get my teeth cleaned. And like, if my appointment's at 3:30, I'm not getting seen until 5:30. And, like you mentioned, you don't want to say like, is it because of the area that I live in? Is it because everybody, tends to look a certain way? But I mean, it's really great that there is like research to support this. Can you talk a little bit more about the research that was conducted that provided proof that people it just wasn't in their head. Like they actually are experiencing what they think they're experiencing.
Yeah, so the folks at UC were incredible. They'd actually been in contact with Vox for like, I think a year, sending us all of these like data. And Sean was really like the big brain, like calculus guy when it came to like sifting through the studies. But like what we were looking at was just very much like, what can we tell via charts? What can we, support through our like anecdotes in the story of the folks that we talked to? And, what are like some of the most like surprising studies? Because again, like there's like the resume study where, like if you have like the same, these are called correspondence studies, right? Like you have like the same exact resume, but like the names are different, and you look at response rates. There are some studies that we looked at that were specific for finding housing, which like the rental market one I thought was really interesting because again, like most folks see stuff for like buying houses, but we're in New York City. I don't know who owns a house.
Right.
So like, rental market stuff. There was some stuff around, I'm trying to remember, whether or not a professor would email you back or like fast enough if you were a prospective PhD student. So if you don't know, like in order to like get into a PhD program, you kind of have to like link up with like a professor who would kind of take you under your wing. But that's something that not a lot of folks know to do. Right. And so like the fact that like if you're trying to like get into a PhD program, again, like if you think about it, that's like income, that's a life change, that's generational wealth. Will a professor respond to you in time, right? So that was kind of the studies that we were looking at. And obviously, like you can't really compare apples to oranges. They're all conducted in different ways, different sample sizes. But we really enjoyed like, having such a trove to look at because that can be really hard to have access to such like high quality data.
Now, you mentioned New York City, and that got me thinking. I know a lot of times people feel so grateful to live in New York City because there's so many different types of people here, and you feel as though like, okay, well, at least I'm not experiencing maybe racism that someone in maybe another area that isn't as diverse is experiencing. But is it still here? Like, should people still feel like, okay, just because it's New York City doesn't mean that you're not experiencing these things?
Yeah, I mean, like, we didn't get into this too much in the piece just because the studies were, across the nation.
Right.
But yeah, I would say that, discrimination is insidious. Like, I don't know how much you can keep your eye out, just because, again, like, it is hard to know. Right. But, I think it is something to, like, think about, like, as you're conducting your own life and like advocating for other people, like, a woman that I spoke to, Keisha Orr, she's the lead of the piece, she was one of these women who were like at the front lines at like in Wall Street, like, breaking barriers. And she had to advocate for a young man who, who she thought was the best candidate by far. But, at the time, like hiring managers were like, well, he doesn't have a degree yet, so we can't give him the job. But the job didn't require a degree. So she like really put herself out in line, and it was exhausting for her. It was really, really exhausting, and she worried about him a lot even after he was hired. But the man went on to have like an excellent career. And I mean, I think that's all that we can really do is just like, support one another, and keep an eye out for these moments.
Now, I want to talk about, because we talked about the time in the article, you use the term artificially short. We have about a minute left. Can you just quickly tell us like what that means and, how that was the theme of this entire article?
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at the data, like the time that we have on Earth, like is not that long, but it's even shorter for Black and brown folks because of the intergenerational like trauma and racism and discrimination that we've experienced, right? And like it continues to happen, but it doesn't need to. Like we don't need to be doing this.
Right.
It is artificially short in the sense that this is all stuff that is preventable. We can do something about it. We don't need to be making life worse for other people for reasons that are very dumb and like not helpful for anyone. So I think that's kind of like the sentiment of the piece is like, we're losing time. It hurts individuals, but also hurts society. Like we're losing out on so many great ideas, so many great people and experiences because we're just wasting time.
Right. Well, I totally appreciate you coming here and having this conversation. Like I said, I've never seen racism be viewed at or explored in this type of way. I thought it was very new, and it was just like really interesting to read and to be like, I think I know what you're talking about here. So I appreciate you taking the time to come with us and talk about this.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. If you would like to read the article that Izzie and Sean wrote, please go to www.vox.com. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more Open right after this.
Jason. Let's go see your room.
What do you think? We kept it a little spare, so you can decorate it how you like.
Dinner!
Oh? Excellent. Soccer. Yeah, I saw you guys out there.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Thanks for hearing me out, bro.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, we love you always.
Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
Welcome back. Puppy Kitty New York City is an organization that focuses on the well-being of animals in need, but one of their programs could actually benefit people who attend, and that is kitten therapy. This form of therapy allows attendees to interact with kittens to help reduce stress, anxiety, and feelings of loneliness. Joining me to discuss all you need to know about kitten therapy is the president of Puppy Kitty NYC, Meagan Licari. I should also mention that we have some special guests joining us today. Let's bring them out. Meagan, thank you so much for joining us and for bringing these adorable kittens.
Yes.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about Puppy Kitty NYC?
Sure. So Puppy Kitty New York City is a animal rescue group here in New York, and we focus mainly on cats, but we do help dogs, guinea pigs, rabbits, hamsters, kind of anything that comes our way. Our mission is to never say no to an animal in need, but kitties are our specialty.
Now, what inspired the creation of this organization? Like, what was the moment that you knew this was something that you wanted to be a part of?
I actually started as a volunteer, and I just, like, my husband wouldn't let me foster, couldn't have extra cats in our house, so I just started driving cats to the vet, and then I was, like, hooked.
Oh,
so I just started as a transport volunteer, and here I am.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, one of the experiences your organization offers is kitten therapy. Now, I feel like I kind of see what it is, but can you just explain what kitten therapy is for those who don't know?
Sure. So kitten therapy is just like a little event. You know, a lot of corporate places do it, and we bring kittens, you hold them, you know, it brings people joy. Everyone, even here, I feel like we're having a little kitten therapy going on in the studio, right? Right. Everyone's smiling like, oh my God. So it's just, you know, a cute little thing to experience and be able to hold kittens, you know, where most people probably don't come across little guys like this too often in your regular life. So it's an opportunity for that.
Now, what, you know, major organization want to offer this type of therapy?
People were actually reaching out to me and asking for it, and I was like, okay, maybe there's a way to like spin this into like raising money for the organization, and raising awareness about kittens and helping people, you know, with their stress levels. And you know, the world's a crazy place. You know, working in offices, people now they're back to the office, that can be stressful. Right. Commutes here in New York City are stressful. So anything to relieve stress and bring joy. These little guys, you know.
Now, as you mentioned, stress could be one of the benefits. What are some other benefits of this form of therapy?
I think, you know, cats in general also can kind of get a bad rap. Like, everybody loves dogs, but, you know, I meet so many people like, oh, yeah, cats. And I'm like, I love cats. Yeah. And there's always a story of, oh, I was attacked by a cat when I was a kid. So I think this just, you know, brings awareness that cats are sweet and, caring, loving little guys, and you know, it sheds a different light on them.
Right. I have to admit, I'm one of those people. I'm like, I don't know too much about cats, but they are very cute, and I'm so glad that you brought them to the studio just for everybody to kind of like get a little taste of what kitten therapy is about. Yeah. Now, how does this improve mental health for both the person, but also like, you know, how does this improve, you know, just the well-being of the cats involved?
For the cats specifically, it's great for their socialization. You could see this little plaid here is a little bit more scared, but I think even since he got here, he's warmed up a little bit. So it's great for their socialization. You know, people when they meet kittens, they want to see that their friend, this guy, he's an adventurer. You know, people want to see that the kittens are friendly, and it really helps prepare them for adoption. Oh, we have an escapee. And it helps prepare them for adoption. And I think for people, you know, It helps them get over their fear. You can test if you have allergies or not. You know, a lot of people say, oh, I don't have allergies, and they take the cat home and they realize that they do. So this is a good way to test out if you're super allergic. It's a good way to get FaceTime with us to hear about what it's like to be a pet owner and the precautions that you need to take, and that it is a lifetime commitment. These little guys can live up to 20 years.
Wow.
So I think it's a really great way to find out about adoption and pet ownership.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I think a lot of people, they view pets as like, sadly, as an accessory to their life, and think, oh my God, it would be so cute to have a kitten or a puppy. But as you mentioned, a lot of people don't know the work that goes into that. Can you talk about that and just why it's important to kind of view that before you decide to take on a pet?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, definitely. It definitely is a commitment. You know, it's like having a child. You're responsible for their little lives. You have to feed them. You have to make sure they get medical care. And one issue here, especially in New York, medical care and veterinary care is extremely expensive. And I don't think people really realize that one trip to the ER can be over $1,000. I highly, highly recommend pet insurance. If you don't have it, get it. It's not if you'll use it, it's when. So pet insurance is really important. And yeah, just it's definitely a commitment. You have to care for them. You have to clean their litter box. If you have a dog, you have to walk them. Small animals. People, I think it's easy because they're in a cage, but it's not. Right. It's a lot of work.
And I want to talk about cages. Clearly we have, you know, the cat, they're so, you know, just full of life, and they want to like bounce around. Can you talk about just the setting that should be appropriate for these animals, even, you know, in regard to the kitten therapy and how people can model that in their own homes?
Yeah. So we always recommend when taking either your kitten or cat home, or even a dog, starting off in a small space. It's like if you had to move into a big mansion, you'd be like, oh, this is a little scary. So it's scary and stressful for them. They don't know where they are. It's best to start them in a small space. And if you see that they're super confident, you feel it out. But most of the time, especially rescue animals and cats who have struggled on the street to survive and been traumatized either from not being fed or being abused, something like that, it's really important to start them off in a small spot.
Now, talking in regards to kitten therapy, how does this help people in comparison to traditional forms of therapy?
It's, you know, I just think it just immediately brings people smiles to their face. Or, you know, something like a nursing home or a group home where pets are not allowed, it would give them an opportunity to maybe have that missing companionship that they're looking for that they may have had in a previous home. So I think it definitely sticks out as something a little different.
Now, what kind of planning goes into making sure that everyone, including the kittens, have an enjoyable therapeutic experience?
Well, having someone like me from the organization being there who's very good at handling cats. As you can see, we've almost had a few little escapes. So you have to be able to handle the kittens. And just, it's pretty easy. There's not a whole lot of planning. We have our little safety area here and just bringing them the supplies that they need. I have food and litter in my bag just in case. So it's pretty simple.
Now, what has the response been like from people who have attended this, you know, kitten therapy?
People are loving it. It's just so cute. And like I said, most of the time you don't see little guys like this. So it really gives people opportunities to hold and interact with tiny kittens. And you know, these guys aren't up for adoption just yet. They still have to get a few more vaccines and be of weight before they can go home. But I think it just is nice for people to interact with them at this age.
And who is the best audience for this? So, you know, is this great for kids? Is this great for elders? Like, who is the best person to kind of have this experience?
Yeah, I would say this is kind of tough for kids because it's so exciting, and you know, there'd be a lot of yelling, and that can make them nervous, the kittens. So right now we're not doing it with, you know, schools like elementary school. We would definitely do it for a college class. You know, there was a study one time about college kids holding kittens, and then they tested the cortisol in their saliva, and the levels went down. So we would definitely offer it for, like, you know, adults, young adults. And I think it would be great for a nursing home or a rehab place where you may have had a cat or a dog and you just miss your furry little companion. So right now we're adults only.
Okay. Now, I understand that this is also, it's not just therapeutic, but also educational. What do you teach people during these sessions, and what can they learn from this?
Like I said, definitely we talk a lot about pet ownership. And another thing that we talk about is kittens in pairs. We get a lot of pushback and disappointment when people say that they only want one kitten. Okay. But when you have kittens this age, it's really important for them to learn from each other. They learn how to groom, they learn how to use the litter box, how to eat, how to not play bite. When you have a single kitten, they tend to bite your fingers, and a lot of them can end up with behavioral issues, what we call single kitten syndrome. So we adopt out kittens in pairs unless you have another pet or young cat in the home. So we tell everybody about that in advance, so they don't say, oh, I just want plaid or kilt, Okay. And we talk about the cat homelessness in New York City and the suffering that goes on in the street, and these little guys' stories and where they came from, and adoption. We really want to promote adoption. No one should be buying cats from breeders when there's hundreds upon hundreds in shelters. If you can't adopt from us, there's our local city shelter and tons of other amazing organizations that literally put their blood, sweat, and tears into getting these little guys off the street. So if we don't have the cat for you, one of my amazing rescue colleagues probably does.
And I'm so glad you mentioned adoption, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, people view pets as oh, I want a cat that looks specifically like this. Can you just talk about maybe the importance of maybe straying away from that and thinking of the animal as just someone, or not someone, but, a being that needs a home and love?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important for people to have pets. I obviously am obsessed with animals. I don't know what my life would be without a pet, but we also need to think that we're here for them. Right. We're rescuing these guys. And I know a lot of people say who rescued who, but, they need us more than we need them. So we really have to think about, we're doing this to save them. And when you adopt a shelter pet, you're not just saving the life of these little guys, but it opens a space for ones that are on the street. Awesome. So we really have to think about what we can do for them.
Okay, that's so amazing. And I love that last part that you mentioned, that when you adopt a pet, that opens a space for another one. So I just want to thank you so much for, joining us, for bringing these cute, adorable cats. As I mentioned, I'm not a cat person. Maybe I might change my mind at the end of this, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If you would like to find out more about kitten therapy, please go to their website at www.puppykittynyc.org. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us, and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Jaime on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.